My daughter turned 7 on a Saturday in October. She had been planning that birthday for 3 months. I want you to understand what that means for a child. 3 months is almost half a year when you are 7. 3 months of going to sleep. Thinking about it, 3 months of telling every person she met, her teacher, her friends. The woman at the grocery store checkout who made the mistake of asking that her birthday was coming and that there was going to be a cake with horses on it and that her cousins were coming and that it was going to be the best day. Her name is Lily. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that makes other people in restaurants turn around and smile without knowing why. She had asked for a horse cake specifically, not horses in general. A specific horse, a white one she had named Cloud, who lived in a YouTube video she had watched approximately 400 times. She had shown me a picture she drew herself of what the cake should look like. White horse, blue flowers around the base, her name in yellow. I had ordered that cake from a bakery 2 weeks in advance. Paid for it, confirmed it twice. The party was at my house, which I had decorated the night before while Lily was asleep. Sneaking downstairs in the dark to hang streamers and blow up balloons in the horse color she had specified. White and blue and a very particular shade of purple that she had shown me on her tablet screen. 22 people were coming, her friends from school, her teacher, who I had also invited because Lily had insisted, my parents, my sister Dana and her husband. The cake was in the refrigerator. Everything was ready. My sister Dana arrived 40 minutes early. This was not unusual. Dana operates on a schedule that exists primarily in relation to her own needs, and arriving early to events is one of the ways she ensures that any setup, any help, any credit for preparation attaches to her presence. She came in through the back door without knocking, also not unusual. She has always treated my house as an extension of hers, a habit I had mentioned and she had never changed. And she came into the kitchen and she looked at everything I had done and she said, "Oh, you went with the cheap streamers." I said, "They're the ones Lily picked." Dana said, "She's 7. She doesn't know the difference." I let that go. I was used to letting things go with Dana. It was the path of least resistance that I had been taking for 34 years, which is how old I was at the time, which means I had been doing it since birth, which means it had been the condition of my life and my family for as long as I could remember. Dana is 2 years older than me. She is the one who got the grades, the one who got the attention, the one who got the specific, warm pride from my parents that I had watched from a slight distance from my entire childhood and adolescence without fully understanding what I had done wrong. To not receive it, I had not done anything wrong. I understand that now. Some families just have a first child who is the sun and everyone else orbits. I was orbiting. I had always been orbiting. That morning, I let the streamer comment go. I said, "Can you help me get the drink set up?" She said, "In a minute," and she opened the refrigerator. She saw the cake. She said, "Is that it?" I said, "Yes." She took it out. She set it on the counter. She looked at it for a long moment. The white horse, the blue flowers, Lily's name in yellow, and she said, "It's a little plain, don't you think?" I said, "Lily loves it." Dana said, "You haven't shown her yet." I said, "No, it's a surprise." She said, "You should have done something bigger with a topper and those little edible glitter things." She turned the cake box slightly, examining it from another angle. "This looks like something from a grocery store." I said, "It's from the bakery on Clement Street. It took 2 weeks to order." She said, "HMM. The particular HMM, that means I hear you and do not find that information relevant." I took the cake back and put it in the refrigerator. I told myself it was fine. It was going to be a good day. Lily was going to come downstairs in an hour and see the decorations, and she was going to make the sound she makes when something exceeds her expectations. A sharp intake of breath followed by a kind of sustained high note. And none of Dana's comments would matter. I was right about some of that. Lily came downstairs at 9-15. She made the sound. She ran through the living room, touching the streamers, counting the balloons, asking me questions faster than I could answer them. Where were her friends coming from? What time was the cake? Could she wear the dress now? Had I remembered the specific purple napkins she had asked for? I had remembered the purple napkins. She threw her arms around my waist and said, "This is perfect, Mama." I held on for a moment longer than the hug required. By noon the house was full. 22 people in the way that feels like 40, the particular density of children at parties. All of them louder than their size would suggest, possible, running in routes through the house that seemed to follow rules no adult could perceive. My parents arrived. My father went to find Dana immediately, as he always did. My mother hugged me and said the house looked nice, and then also went to find Dana, which was also as it always was. I watched this and I felt the familiar thing I always felt watching it, a small settled weight in my chest. The specific gravity of being accustomed to something without having accepted it. Lily didn't notice. She was 7 and it was her birthday and her friends were there. And she was the center of her own specific universe in the way that children are, when everything is working the way it should. I went back to the kitchen to finish getting the food out. The moment happened at 2:15. I know the exact time because I was looking at my phone when I heard it, checking a message from one of the other parents about pickup time. The sound was Lily's voice, but wrong. Not the high note of excitement, the other sound, the one that starts low and cracks in the middle and becomes something you cannot unhear. Once you have heard it come from your child, I was in the kitchen. The sound came from the dining room. I got there and for seconds, the cake was on the table. Or it had been. What was on the table now was the cake box open with the front half of the cake. The white horse, the blue flowers, collapsed inward. Not fallen, pressed. Someone had pressed the front of the cake hard with something flat. Lily was standing at the end of the table and she was making the sound. And she was looking at her cake, and everyone in the room was looking at either the cake or Lily or each other. My niece, Dana's daughter, 9 years old, was standing 2 feet from the table, holding a large picture book flat against her chest, the kind you would use to press something. The corners of the book's cover had icing on them. I looked at my sister. Dana was already talking. She said, "It was an accident, she was just trying to look at it." "The book slipped," I said. "The book slipped," Dana said. "These things happen at kids' parties. You know how." Lily was crying now, not the dramatic crying that children sometimes perform, the real kind, the silent kind that takes over your face before the sound catches up. My niece said, "I just wanted to see the horse." I looked at the book in her hands. I looked at the icing on its corners. I said, very quietly, "Please take her outside." I was talking to Dana. Dana looked at me for a moment. She started to say something else. I looked at her and she stopped saying it and she took her daughter outside. I went to Lily. I don't want to spend too long on what followed because this story is not about what damage was done. It's about what happened after. What I will say is this: we fixed the cake as much as it could be fixed. The bakery was closed, but a friend who had come to the party, a woman named Rose, who I will mention again later because she matters, turned out to have taken cake decorating classes. And she spent 40 minutes reconstructing the horse from the remaining frosting and some white chocolate she found in my pantry. It was not the same cake, but Lily, who is 7 and resilient in the way that 7-year-olds are, when the adults around them hold steady, blew out her candles and ate to pieces and told me at bedtime that it was still the best birthday she'd had. I held her until she fell asleep. Then I sat in the kitchen for a long time and I thought about what I was going to do. Dana called the next morning. She called at 8:15, which is the time she knows I am home, but Lily is not yet awake, which means she had chosen this window deliberately. She said, "I wanted to check in about yesterday." I said, "Okay." She said, "I think Emma felt really bad about the cake. She's been upset." Emma is her daughter. I said, "I'm sorry to hear she's upset." Dana said, "I think it would really help if Lily reached out to her, to let her know there's no hard feelings." I was quiet for a moment. I said, "You want Lily to comfort Emma?" Dana said, "I just think it would be good for both of them." Emma looks up to Lily. I said, "The cake had icing on the corners of Emma's book." Dana said, "I told you, it slipped." I said, "The book was flat against her chest. I saw it." There was a pause. Dana said, "I don't know why you're making this into something bigger than it was." I said, "I'm not making it into anything. I'm describing what I saw." She said, "You always do this. You always have to have the last word about things." I said, "I have to go. Lily's going to be up soon." I hung up. My mother called that afternoon to say she hoped everything had smoothed over between Dana and me, and that Dana had seemed upset, and that it was important in families to be able to move past things. I said, "I'll keep that in mind, Mom." My father didn't call. My father rarely called me directly. His calls went to Dana, and whatever he thought came to me filtered through her or through my mother. I went back to my normal life. For 6 months, I did not hear from Dana about anything substantive. My sister got engaged in March. His name is Patrick. He is the kind of man who laughs at his own jokes a half beat before the punchline arrives, which tells you everything about how he moves through the world. He is not a bad person. He is simply a person entirely organized around his own comfort, which made him a reasonable match for Dana. I heard about the engagement from my mother, not from Dana, which also told me things. The wedding was planned for the following October, same month as Lily's birthday, which I noted and which no one in my family appeared to have considered. I sent Dana a congratulations text. She responded with a heart emoji. This was the extent of our direct communication for 2 more months. The call came in May. I was at work. I run a small event planning and vendor coordination business. which I started 5 years ago and which had, by that point, grown to the place where I was managing a staff of 4 and handling 12 to 15 events per year when my phone rang and it was Dana and she said, "I need to ask you a favor." I said, "Okay," she said. "You know the Aldridge venue on the coast?" I said, "I know it." The Aldridge was one of the most sought-after wedding venues within 200 miles. It sat on a bluff above the ocean with a main hall that held 200 guests and an outdoor ceremony space that photographers had made famous. It was booked, in normal circumstances, 18 months to 2 years in advance. Dana said, "We put in an inquiry 8 months ago and we've been on the wait list. And last week we got a call that there's been a cancellation and we can have the date we wanted, October 14th, but we have to confirm by Friday." I said, "Congratulations." Dana said, "The thing is, there's a deposit and they have a policy. With new clients, they require references. 2 professional references from people in the event industry who can vouch for the booking." I understood where this was going. I said, "You need me to be a reference." Dana said, "You work with venues all the time, you know people. If you called them and vouched for us, it would go through immediately. Without that, it might take weeks and we could lose the date." I said, "You need a professional reference from me for your wedding at the Aldridge." She said, "I know things have been a little." I said, "Dana, what happened at Lily's birthday?" She said, "I think we should separate that from this." I said, "Okay, I'll think about it." She said, "The deadline is Friday, today is Tuesday." I said, "I know what day it is." I hung up. I sat with this for approximately 48 hours, not because I was undecided. I knew, within about 10 minutes of that phone call, what I was going to do. I sat with it because I wanted to be certain. I wanted to make sure that what I was deciding came from a clear place and not from something hot and reactive that I would regret. I thought about the cake, about Lily's face, about the sound she made. I thought about the call the next morning, asking Lily to comfort Emma. I thought about 6 months of silence and an engagement announcement delivered through my mother and a heart emoji in response to my congratulations. I thought about the Aldridge. I had actually been to the Aldridge professionally. I had helped coordinate a rehearsal dinner there 2 years earlier for a client, and I had met the venue director, a precise and organized woman named Helen, and we had exchanged cards and followed each other on LinkedIn in the way that people in aligned industries do. I thought about what Dana was actually asking. She was asking me to use a professional relationship I had built on my own with my own work over years to open a door for her. She was asking me to put my name and my professional reputation behind a booking for her benefit. She was asking me to do this 6 months after her daughter destroyed my child's birthday cake. And she had responded by asking my child to comfort her daughter on Thursday morning. I called Helen at the Aldridge. I said, "Helen, it's Sarah Mercer. We worked together on the Fontaine rehearsal dinner about 2 years ago." She said she remembered me and that it had been a pleasure, and what could she do for me? I said, "I'm calling about a reference request. My sister Dana has applied to book your venue for October 14th. She asked me to call as a professional reference." Helen said, "Yes, we have her inquiry. It's been helpful to hear from someone in the industry." I said, "I want to be straightforward with you because I think that's the only way to operate professionally." There was a brief pause. Helen said, "Of course." I said, "My sister and I have had some significant personal difficulties recently. I'm not able to provide an enthusiastic professional endorsement for this booking. I want to make sure that's clear before anything moves forward based on my name being attached to it." Helen was quiet for a moment. She said, "I appreciate your honesty." I said, "I also want to be clear that this is a personal matter and not a reflection of any logistical issues. But I wouldn't feel right letting my name be used as a positive reference when I can't in good conscience provide one." Helen said, "That's very helpful context. Thank you for calling." I said, "Of course. I hope the process is straightforward from here." We said goodbye. I sat at my desk for a while. Then I called Dana. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Dana, I called the Aldridge." She said, "Oh good." I said, "I told them I couldn't provide an enthusiastic professional reference for the booking." The silence that followed was the particular silence of someone recalibrating, the kind where you can almost hear the shift happening. She said, "What?" I said, "I told them the truth, that we'd had personal difficulties and I wasn't in a position to endorse the booking." Her voice changed. She said, "You called them and told them not to book us?" I said, "I didn't tell them anything except that I couldn't provide a positive reference." "Which is true," she said. "Do you understand what you just did? We could lose the date. We could lose the whole venue." I said, "I understand that," she said. "Because of a birthday cake. You're doing this because of a cake?" I said, "I'm doing this because you asked me to put my professional name behind a favor for you. And I'm not able to do that honestly, so I was honest. She said, "This is insane. Her voice was getting louder. You have always done this. You have always made everything about you. Everything is always some slight. Something that happened that you can't let go." I said, "Dana." She kept going. I said, "Dana." Again, steady. She stopped. I said, "Lily cried for 40 minutes at her own birthday party. Your daughter pressed your book into her cake on purpose. And the next morning you called me and asked Lily to comfort Emma, and in 6 months, you never once said I'm sorry, not to me, not to Lily." Silence. I said, "So when you called asking me to use my professional relationships on your behalf, I had to make a decision about whether I could do that honestly, and I couldn't." She said, very quietly, "You're unbelievable." I said, "I hope the wedding is wonderful, Dana. I mean that." I hung up. My mother called 40 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour after that. I let that one go too. The third call I answered because I knew she would continue calling and I had work to do. She said, "Sarah, what happened with the Aldridge?" I said, "I told them the truth about my relationship with Dana." My mother said, "You sabotaged your sister's wedding venue." I said, "I declined to provide a reference. I couldn't give honestly." She said, "That's the same thing." I said, "It isn't actually." She said, "Dana is devastated. Patrick is furious. Do you know how hard they worked to get that venue?" I said, "I imagine." She said, "Over a birthday cake." Sarah, this is over a birthday cake. I want you to understand something about that phrase. Over a birthday cake. I want you to understand what it costs to hear it and why it cost what it cost. Because it is a specific thing to have your family reduce the injury to your child to its smallest possible frame and then use that reduction as evidence that you are unreasonable for caring. I said, "It wasn't about a cake, Mom." She said, "Then what was it about?" I said, "It was about the fact that Dana has never apologized to me or to Lily." My mother said, "Dana is sorry." I said, "Did she say that?" A pause. "Then she feels bad." I said, "Mom, did she say the words to me or to Lily?" Another pause. I said, "I have to go." What happened next surprised me. And then didn't. The Aldridge did not cancel Dana's inquiry. They simply required additional references to industry references who were not related to the applicant. This was a standard policy that Dana, in her urgency, had apparently overlooked or not mentioned to me. Dana found other references. The wedding remained on track, but the call I had made to Helen had done something that I had not entirely anticipated. It had become known. Not through any action of Helen's, she was professional and discreet, but Dana had told my mother. What happened? My mother had told her sister had told someone, and in the particular telephone of a family. The story had traveled until it reached people I knew professionally. A coordinator who had referred me clients before. A vendor I worked with regularly who called to ask, carefully, what had happened. I told them the same thing I had told Helen, that I had been asked to provide a professional reference for a family member and had declined, because I couldn't do it honestly. Both of them, separately, said some version of, "Good for you." This surprised me. It also told me something about how I was perceived professionally versus how I was perceived in my family, and that gap was worth sitting with. I want to step back from the timeline for a moment and tell you something about my family that I think is important for understanding why things went the way they went. My parents are not bad people. I want to be clear about that. They are people who came from a particular set of values that organized the world in a particular way, and one of those values was this: harmony within the family is more important than accuracy. This is not an unusual value. A lot of families run on it. What it means in practice is that the family maintains a shared story about itself. Who is generous, who is difficult, who succeeds, who struggles, and when reality conflicts with that story, reality is adjusted. Rather than the story. In my family's story, Dana was the successful one. She had gotten the grades, the appropriate marriage, the house in the right neighborhood. She was the referent point. She was the son. My success, a business I had built from scratch, a staff, a reputation, didn't fit the story as neatly because it had happened outside the son's orbit. I had built it without asking for approval or credit. I had just done it. And things you do without asking for credit don't always register in families organized around a particular kind of visibility. When I made that call to the Aldridge, what I had done in my family's story was disrupt harmony. I had used a resource, my professional relationships, as leverage in a personal conflict. That was the story, that I had been asked to use those same resources as a favor. That I had been asked to do this without any acknowledgement of what had happened to Lily. That what I had done was simply decline to lie. None of that fit the story. So I became the problem. The summer was quiet in the way that silences are loud. My parents came to Lily's school performance in June. Dana was there. Too, she did not speak to me, I did not speak to her. My parents moved between us in the way that diplomats move in a room, where two parties are not acknowledging each other carefully, trying to make the gap less visible. Lily noticed, she is 7. Not 2, she asked me on the way home why Aunt Dana hadn't said hello. I said, Aunt Dana and I are having a disagreement. It doesn't have anything to do with you, she said. Is it about my birthday cake? I said, what made you think that? She said, Emma told me at school that her mom was mad at you. I held the steering wheel and I breathed slowly. I said, grown-ups sometimes have disagreements that take a while to work out. You don't need to worry about it, she said, okay. And then, Emma said her mom was trying to do something nice. I said, let's get ice cream. We got ice cream, in August. My father called me directly. This was unusual enough that I answered even though I was in the middle of something. He said, Sarah, I want to talk to you. I said, okay. He said, the wedding is in October. Your mother and I are hoping that you'll be there. I said, I wasn't invited. Dad, a pause. He said, what? I said, Dana didn't send me an invitation. Another pause, longer. He said, I'm sure. That's an oversight. I said, I'm sure you could ask her. He said, you're her sister. I said, I know. He said, whatever happened between you? I said, Dad, she hasn't spoken to me in 3 months. She hasn't apologized for what happened at Lily's birthday, and she didn't send me an invitation. I don't think it's an oversight. He was quiet. Then he said, I'll talk to her. I said, you don't have to. I'm not asking you to intervene. I just want you to know the actual situation. He said, she's your sister? I said, I know. He said, family is family. I said, I know. That too. I waited. He said, she was wrong about the cake. I know she was. This was the most direct thing my father had said to me about any of this. I felt the thing it costs to say, coming from him. I said, thank you for saying that. He said, but you're both my daughters, and I need you at that wedding. I said, I'll wait to hear from Dana. He said, Sarah. I said, Dad, if she wants me there, she can call me. She called me on a Thursday in September. She called at 8 in the morning. She said, Patrick and I would like you to come to the wedding, you and Lily both. I said, okay. She said, I'm sending the invitation today. There's a +1. I said, okay. There was a pause that had the weight of something unfinished. I waited. She said, about Lily's birthday. I waited. She said, Emma shouldn't have done what she did. I waited. She said, I should have handled it differently after. I said, Dana. She said, what? I said, I need you to say it plainly. A long pause. Then she said, I'm sorry for what happened to Lily's cake and for how I handled it afterward. I let that sit for a moment. I said, thank you. She said, we'll see you at the wedding. I said, we'll be there. I want to stop here and tell you something. I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, that's it? She apologized. And you went to the wedding. Where's the revenge? Where's the moment where everything falls apart? And I want to be honest with you because this story is true and I told you it would be true. And the truth is this, sometimes the story doesn't end with a collapse. Sometimes it ends with the phone call that should have happened 9 months earlier, finally happening. Sometimes the revenge is just the moment when the person who should have apologized runs out of reasons not to, but that's not the whole story because there is a second part. I went to the wedding. Lily wore a dress she had picked herself, deep blue, with small white flowers, which she informed me was a good color combination because she had done research. I did not ask what research. I trusted the process. The Aldrich was as beautiful as it looked in photographs. The ceremony was on the outdoor bluff. The ocean was doing what the ocean does in October when the light is right. That particular quality of silver and gray that makes everything look like it's been lit for a film. Dana was beautiful. Patrick cried when she walked in, which I had not expected and which made me revise him upward slightly in my estimation. I sat with my parents. My mother cried throughout. My father sat very straight and still in the way he does when he is feeling things he considers unsuitable for public display. At the reception, Dana found me before dinner. She said, thank you for coming. I said, you look beautiful. She looked at Lily, who was attempting to teach a much younger cousin a complicated handshake she had invented. She said, she looks just like you. I said, she has my stubbornness. Dana smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind she had when she wasn't performing anything. I had not seen it in a while. She said, I talked to Emma. She told Lily she was sorry, properly. I said, I know, Lily told me. She said, is it? Are we okay? I looked at my sister. I thought about 34 years of orbiting. I thought about the cake. I thought about the call to the Aldrich and the months of silence and the invitation that had taken until September. I thought about my father saying she was wrong about the cake. I thought about Dana's voice in September saying, I'm sorry, plainly in the way I had asked her to say it. I said, we're working on it. She nodded. She went back to her wedding. Here is the second part. Rose, the woman who had fixed Lily's cake at her birthday, the one who had taken cake decorating classes, and spent 40 minutes reconstructing a white horse from remaining frosting and white chocolate, was also at the wedding. We had become closer in the months since the birthday. She had reached out after, not to discuss what happened, but just to check in. We had gotten coffee, then dinner, then coffee again. She was the kind of person who does things because they occur to her as the right thing to do, without requiring much deliberation or credit. At the reception, she found me by the bar. She said, how are you doing with all of this? I said, better than I expected. She said, did Dana actually apologize? I said, in September. Over the phone, Rose said, do you believe it? I thought about it. I said, I believe she's capable of being sorry. Whether she understood what she was sorry for is a longer conversation. Rose said, that's a very generous read. I said, it's a wedding, I'm being generous. She laughed. Later, during the dancing, Lily came and found me. She was flushed from running and she pulled me onto the dance floor and we danced to a song neither of us knew, and she laughed the way she laughs, and 3 people nearby turned to look at her with the involuntary smile that her laugh produces. In strangers, I thought, there is no version of how the last year went that I would trade. Not the hard parts. Not the phone call to the Aldridge, or the months of silence, or the conversation with my father, or even the 40 minutes Lily cried at her own birthday. All of it had happened, and all of it had led here, to this dance floor at this wedding, with my daughter laughing, and a friendship with Rose that I had not anticipated, and a father who had said she was wrong about the cake, and a sister who had finally said I'm sorry. There is no clean victory in a family. There is just the long work of it. I want to tell you about what happened 3 weeks after the wedding. I got a call from a client who was planning a large corporate event. 150 people, today's, a venue on the coast. She had been referred to me by Helen at the Aldridge. Helen had told her, this is the most honest person I've worked with in this industry. That referral became one of the largest contracts I had signed to that point. It led to 2 more referrals over the following 6 months. The call I had made to Helen, which my mother called sabotage, which Dana had said was over a birthday cake. That call, which I had made because I could not put my professional name behind something that was not true, had become the thing that built my business to the next level. I am not telling you this as a lesson about karma. I don't believe the universe runs on lesson delivery. I am telling you this because it is what actually happened, and because I think it matters that the same act, which cost me in one context, in my family, where it was read as betrayal, turned out to be precisely the thing that made me trustworthy in another context. In the professional world where I actually operated, my family saw a sister who had sabotaged a wedding venue. Helen saw a professional who had chosen honesty over convenience, the same act. 2 completely different readings, and the reading that stuck in the world that actually mattered for my life was Helen's. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where the thing that was punished in your family was exactly the thing that was rewarded in the wider world? Where being too much, or too direct, or too unwilling to maintain a comfortable fiction, where that thing that your family called a problem turned out to be your greatest asset outside it. I think about this when I think about the years I spent orbiting. My sister was the sun in our family's story. She got the grades and the attention and the reference status, and the particular warmth of my parents' pride. I got used to doing things without needing to be seen doing them. I got used to building quietly. I got used to being honest in situations where honesty was inconvenient, because I had watched what the alternative cost and I didn't want to pay it. Those skills, built in the shadow of being someone's orbit, turned out to be precisely the skills my business ran on. You don't always get to choose what forms you, but sometimes the thing that forms you in shadow builds something the light would have blinded. Lily is 8 now. Her birthday was last month. We did it at the house again. Streamers in the colors she specified, balloons in the configuration she approved, a cake she designed herself. This year the theme was marine biology, because her interests had pivoted in the way that 8-year-olds pivot. And the cake had a blue whale on it and small sugar-sculpted fish around the base. Dana came. She brought Emma. They arrived on time, not early. Emma gave Lily a card she had written herself. I don't know what it said because it was private between the 2 of them. But Lily read it and then looked up at Emma and said, it's okay, we're okay. The way 8-year-olds can decide something is over and then it is over. Dana stood near the kitchen for most of the party, not organizing anything, just being there. At one point she poured lemonade for a group of kids who came in from outside. She didn't announce it or ask for credit, she just poured the lemonade. At the end of the party, when people were leaving, she found me in the kitchen and she said, the cake is incredible. I said, Lily designed it herself. She said, she's remarkable. I said, she is, and Dana left. My mother caught my eye across the room. I don't know exactly what her expression contained. Something between relief and something older, something that had been sitting in her for a while. She gave me a small nod. I gave one back. My father was helping Lily with a piece of cake that had somehow ended up on the floor. He was on his knees, 63 years old, cleaning up blue whale frosting. And Lily was laughing at him and telling him he was doing it wrong. He looked up at me and he said, she's right. I am doing it wrong. I said, you are. He laughed. I am not going to tell you that my family is fixed. Families don't fix the way a broken object fixes, with a clean seam. And the original shape restored, they shift, they find new configurations. Some things that were true stop being true. And some things you thought were settled turn out to be ongoing. What I will tell you is this: the year after Lily's 7th birthday was one of the hardest years I have had with my family, and it was also the year I stopped performing certain things. Stopped performing patience with things that were not acceptable. Stopped performing okay when things were not okay. Stopped performing the particular version of family harmony that required me to absorb damage and then smile and then absorb more. The phone call to Helen cost me. It cost me months of difficult silence and family pressure and being called unreasonable. It did not feel like power when I made it. It felt like the only honest thing available to me. And I did it because I had run out of the energy required. To be dishonest, that is not a dramatic thing. It does not make a good revenge story. In the classic sense, there was no moment where my family was humbled in public. There was no grand reversal. There was a phone call, and then months of difficulty. And then a sister who finally said I'm sorry, and a father who said she was wrong about the cake, and a referral from a woman who had found me honest, and a daughter who designs cakes with blue whales and tells her cousin it's okay, and reads a card privately and holds things lightly in a way that I am still learning. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and telling the truth? What did you choose? And do you still think you made the right call? I read every comment, every one.